Welcome to the L.A.B podcast,
where we empower women to use their repertoire to heal and thrive. I'm Lynn Raine.
I'm Regina Chow Trammel.
And I'm Yvette Latunde. We are Latina, Asian, and Black professional women.
There is a need for professional women to share their perspectives while navigating our roles.
We cover cultural ways of thinking that shape this discussion and share practical tips for managing stress,
thinking through identity, navigating life stage change, and living in abundance.
This is the L.A.B.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the L.A.B. This episode is about work-life balance. Just a little bit, usually this term, when we hear the term work-life balance, which has become a little controversial, ladies. Some people say there is no such thing as work-life balance. Usually the term is talking about a person's professional and personal life and being able to give both areas of your life enough to thrive and flourish, or at least maintain. One of the definitions I found is the extent to which a person can concurrently balance the emotional, behavioral, and time demands of both paid work, personal, and family responsibilities. And that's Hill et al. 2001. Another one by Fleetwood 2007 is work-life balance is about people having a measure of control over when and where and how they work. Very relevant to post-2020, post-COVID. And some of the factors that come up as related to variables in kind of the work-life balance, if we want to use that term, are job satisfaction, motivation, productivity, health, job security, safety, and well-being. And then there's another article that talks about 4 components feeding into that. A safe work environment. And we can think about safety as emotional, spiritual, physical, psychological, occupational health care, appropriate work time, and an appropriate salary, right? So just to contextualize this topic a little bit, I was reading a recent article by Jacqueline Rodriguez, and I thought it was very interesting. It's called Work Life for Women, especially women of color, and how she talks about it's key to restarting the economy, right? So this article talks about policies like flex work and how we work and family leave and paid sick time and how that really factors into this idea of work-life balance and how, given the wage gaps, the high unemployment for women of color, lack of promotion and tenure. I mentioned in another podcast, you have an absorbent amount of women of color, especially Black women, being brought into organizations, especially higher education, as contingent workers or contract workers. So they don't have that job security. So if you think about discrimination, implicit bias, institutional racism, to many Black, Indigenous, LGBTQIA, Latina, and Southeast Asian women, I wonder how that factors into this pursuit of balance as it relates to job satisfaction, motivation, a safe work environment. So what do you think about that idea, Regina?
I think that's such an important discussion because, as we know, Yvette, just like you said, in a post-2020 world, the world has fundamentally changed. And we have all, I think, noticed, right? So a lot of my research is in mindfulness, and mindfulness is about awareness. And I think we have more awareness of the impacts of work not being balanced in our life. You know, we've kind of lived prior to 2020 with a hustle mentality. I was just thinking about this question, what you're saying, Yvette, about what my life was like before then, like in 2019. And I look back on my calendar and was just like, what? How? Like, I don't even know how I did all the stuff I did. Like, I can't even keep up with my dental appointments now. That was just one thing I sort of let go in a post-2020 world. My teeth are probably not in great shape as a result, but it's just a small like idea of, something's got to give. So and about fair wages and about workplaces, I just don't think workplaces have kept up. And so I was reading just this morning, and I don't know if you ladies have seen kind of this viral TikTok meme that's going around about quiet quitting. So Gen Z, right, is talking all about quiet quitting. And it's this idea about, I'm not going to have my labor and my work be the defining feature of my identity. My value is not based on how much I have to work in order to climb that ladder in whatever structural, situation I'm in. Just like you talked about this last episode, in a previous episode, Yvette, about how structures don't support, right, these populations, and how Black, especially faculty and other women of color, are contingent workers. How do you hustle your way out of that? So anyways, I've been thinking a lot about that. And again, I'm still a work in progress. I think back on my 2019 schedule and my schedule now, I see a lot more balance come into my life because of that awareness, because of that quiet space where I could just evaluate. And I just think for me, it's really about, how do I want to evaluate every year? What are the most important things? So I have a high school senior right now, and I just am more and more aware, like, this is my last year in him in the nest. And so I want to make sure that my working life is not taking up all that space, that I don't have any memories this year except driving around and being busy. I just think that's how it's come up for me. Yeah. What do you think, Lynn? How has it come up for you?
I've done a lot of reflection through the years on this concept of work-life balance. And I think looking back, and I'll share a story that, again, I'll be very vulnerable in this podcast and share stories that I probably haven't said out loud to anybody else, but to kind of show you my journey and my progression and what work-life balance means to me. Again, I'm going to tie this back to my cultural background, because I think your family of origin and your culture play a role in how you see these things. So my parents had very strong work ethics, and I appreciate that from them. But they were the kind of parents that I remember my mom got a really bad pneumonia once. And the doctor said, you need to stay home, or, I should hospitalize you, but just stay home. And she kept working because she was in a job that if she didn't go to work, she would have lost her job. So that's what I grew up seeing, right? Parents that would go to work, even when they had this, hospital, something that they should have gone to the hospital for. So to me, what that message meant to me was, work is always first. You put work first, right? And you don't take care of your own needs. So it was in some ways, I love my parents, but it was bad modeling, right? Because they set me up to think of work as a priority that you put first, even putting your health needs second, right? Because again, and this probably, goes back to the last podcast that we talked about, of that, scarcity mindset. But anyways, so how it showed up in my life, I had to give that context a little bit so you understand how I view work. So when I was in my job after finishing undergrad, I was about to start a master's program, and I went to my boss. They're both going to laugh about this one. I went to my boss and I said, I'm starting this master's program, and, they offer classes, Monday, Wednesday evening, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. When would you like me to take those classes so that work can be prioritized? What days, you don't want me leaving here to go to school? I put work first. So again, that's where I started. And looking back, I'm glad I've come a far way from that. But this idea, right, that my personal life, and the reason I'm giving that example is because the way that I thought about it in my early 20s is that my personal life had to revolve around work, not the other way around. And actually, I think I was pretty judgy of people that would make work fit, especially when I became a supervisor, when I had those employees that were like, I'm taking Wednesday off because I'm going to the spa. And I was thinking, can't you go on Saturday? Like in my head, can't you go on Saturday? Why Wednesday? And I guess I struggled with people that put work around their personal lives. But you know what? I was the one that had it wrong. Because here's the thing, I think we are easily replaceable at work. They can replace us in a minute. So I think what's coming from pandemic, right? The great resignation, what's coming from this, quiet quitting, that we're realizing is people setting boundaries with work and saying, I'm not going to give you a penny that I'm not paid for, but really what that equals is not that I need to be paid for every minute of the day, but that my life outside of work matters just as much. So I think where I saw issues of work-life balance coming up, I mean, again, having my priorities wrong. But I think it was always, and again, I think this part is cultural, of always putting others before yourself. That's very much a cultural thing for me. So, but it wasn't putting my family first necessarily, it was putting work first. Missing special events in my children's lives that I was like, I'm working, I can't be there, or missing out on a great vacation opportunity because no, this is a bad time for work, or the most detrimental pieces were impacted my health and well-being. So there's something you mentioned, Regina, that caught my attention. You said you look back on your 2019 calendar and you said, how was I doing all those things? And I'm going to offer a different question, not asking the how, but why would you want to carry that schedule? So not the how, but why would you want that? So I think that's where, I think we need to shift priorities. Yvette, what do you think? Where in your life, where do you see these issues of work-life balance popping up for you that you've seen?
Wow, that was great. I love the stories, Lynn and Regina. For me, I've got to reframe the concept of work-life balance to really just talk about what are my priorities? What are my values? What are my priorities? And for me, that included self-care as a discipline and self-preserving. And so if we think about self-preserving, if I looked up a dictionary kind of definition, it talks about protecting oneself from harm or death, especially regarded as a basic instinct, right? And so this comes up for me because when I first came to the academy, that was a totally new world for me. I came from K through 12, where you work 7 to 3. You didn't have to write. You didn't have to boast about yourself. You didn't have to go up for promotion and tenure. You just got tenure after so many years. So coming into this world of higher education, I remember just moving to L.A. from Fresno, California, a place that economically was way more affordable, right? And with my son was 3 and a 5-year-old. And then I had a teenager. And I remember working 120-hour weeks because no one shared information about how it's structured differently. No one said, these are strategies for how to thrive and do whatever. So there were all these vague expectations that I didn't really know what they were. So I thought, well, let me just work, and somehow I'll hit the target, right? I remember my provost at that time, his name is Dr. Michael White. I remember him after a heart procedure coming to an event and telling us, God does not want you working 90 hours a week. That is not the way to go. You don't want to end up over here with me, right? But again, it was that scarcity mindset. It was the vagueness. I don't know what to do. And I'm a Black woman in higher ed, and how the percentage of us in higher ed that are tenured and promoted are so slim. So it's not like I'm looking around at all of these models, but I have my mother as a model who was a college professor. And I'm thinking of these images of kind of work-life balance. I have images of massage therapists coming to the house to massage my mother. I have images of going to nail salons on a regular basis with my mother. I have images of my mother always making time to get her hair done. And she would say to herself, no, I want a nice car. I want the Volvo S, whatever it was. I work hard. I have a business. I'm college educated. I deserve this thing. So those are the images that I had to pull back from. And my mother and father, my father was in private practice after retiring from the county mental health. I just remember them doing everything with their children. And because I had such fond memories of a great childhood, I thought there's got to be a way that I have to structure what I'm doing so that I don't miss out on this. I want to be at a park in green spaces with my kids on a Monday when I can. So yes, I have to do these things, but I can organize these things in a way that I can prioritize what I value the most. And what I value the most, although there's that economic pressure, because that's very real, there's some way I can figure this out. And I just had mentors, models that helped me kind of figure that out along the way. Yeah. Lynn, how can the abundance mindset help us to aspire to create the quality of life we desire in the face of capitalism and in the devaluing of education right now? How do you think that abundance mindset could help us with this work-life balance?
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. I got into really bad habits in 2020 at the start of the pandemic because I was home. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do the things that I normally would do after work. So I remember working like 13-hour days easily. And then I realized that wasn't healthy, right? And had those impacts. So going back to like that abundance mindset that we talked about before, that helped me set boundaries. So going back to, me working 13-hour days, one of the things that I did for myself is, no, I don't need to be working till 10 o'clock at night to get clients. So for example, now I end work at 5 every day. I'm done. I'm clocking out at 5 o'clock, and it's okay. Whoever wants to see me can call me before that. Come see me before me. If you're not available after 5, I'm not your girl, go somewhere else. I can't. So setting those boundaries, I think, are important. And again, coming from that abundance mindset, right? Like even in academia is, insanity, right? Like there's always something to do. You could be working 24 hours a day and still not get all your work done. So I think even working in academic setting as well, in higher education, I think it's setting those limits, saying no to things. I think that's a big one, saying no. You're going to get amazing opportunities and you have to say no. Or I think asking yourself, is this opportunity going to add to what my priorities are? How does this align with my life's priorities? So one of the things that I would say is, I think it's important to put your needs first. Again, with that abundance mindset of, I can end work at 5 and still have a successful private practice. Or I can say no to this grant or this research opportunity because I have too much on my plate at this point. So, and again, right, if you're working from that scarcity mindset, right, you can think, well, I have to do this research project because I will never come on my lap, it'll never fall on my desk again. But if you're working from that, abundance mindset, you say, I can't take this on right now. I have too much on my plate. This is going to throw my work-life balance off. But you know what? Something like this will come again in the future. And I may have the capacity, the bandwidth, and the time to do this in the future. Because I think that's a trap, right? Especially I think as, women, professional women in the workplace, from our different, ethnic backgrounds, right? We do feel like we need, right? Like, for me, being of a Latina, being Latina, it's that concept of brown time. You're always late. Right. So I feel like throughout my career, I've always had to fight against that. Well, I can't be late because then I'll be confirming, right, these things about my culture that are not positive. And you have to kind of let go of those things, right? I don't have to prove myself to anyone. I will do the very best I can. And you know what? Sometimes I will be late, and that's okay. And not being super harsh on myself. So I think, again, it's setting boundaries, learning to say no, do the things you want. If this COVID pandemic has taught us anything, or I should say not taught us, but reminding us, is that life is short. We have to take care of ourselves, and we need to, our lives can't just be all work. We have to put in those priorities. Where do we want to travel? What parks do we want to see? What hikes do we want to go on? What beaches do we want to, what do we want to do with our families, with our friends, with our partners? So I think I think the abundance mindset can be very helpful in setting boundaries with work-life balance. Regina, I'm going to ask you, in your work, what areas do you see that where people suffer the most when there's an imbalance in their work-life balance, work-life issues or balance.
Yeah, no, I love these stories, and I just I'll answer, but I'll circle back, which is it's going to show up in your health, right? Just like Yvette talked about, that was so powerful that you were working 120 hours a week because no one told you that's not okay for you. No one cared enough until this provost showed up after a heart problem. I mean, talk about, thinking about, I love that reframe of the question, Lynn, of not how did I do it, but why am I doing this? Why am I doing this to myself? Why am I punishing myself that way? And I think for me, I just think that health is holistic. That is going to be mental health. That's going to be physical health, and mental health is emotional health as well. What is your emotional capacity? And spiritual health? How is it sucking your soul dry? And I think being aware and, in mindfulness, we talk a lot about awareness of all these aspects of ourselves. And so when we are out of balance, when there is no balance, and when work is superseding our time, our energy, our capacity, we are punishing ourselves. What I heard from both of you actually that I want to say is just there's a power struggle. I heard this power struggle of, okay, there's a purpose and value I have in my life. And then there's all these impinging structural issues. Brown time, Lynn, I've never heard of that. Brown time, that you're fighting stereotypes to not be perceived as whatever stereotype that is of you being late. For me as an Asian, I'm fighting stereotypes that I'm never going to complain, right? I'm just going to quietly take on more and more and more and just be quiet about it. I just think we all suffer, or right? Like for Black women, I'm not trying to stereotype, but these are the stereotypes I've heard, right? Like the angry Black woman about impinging and responsibilities, normal responsibilities, and being able to complain about it is perceived as, overcompensated in anger. It's just ways of how there's a power imbalance and that we're, again, constantly fighting that. So I think it's going to show up in our health that we're not aware of. And I think if there's a best message I could give to our listeners is to check in with your body. Because sometimes I think for us as professional women, we've turned that off. We've been taught to turn that off, that we have not kind of gone, reached back and looked at how our, kind of ancestral medicine has informed us. And a lot of that, let me just tell you a quick story. So growing up, my mom and my grandma would always be like, don't microwave in those plastic tubs. You can't char your meat. And honestly, this is like many years ago, many moons ago. And everyone in the family would be like, no, it's not going to cause cancer. Like everything caused cancer in my family. Plastic, don't microwave plastic. Don't char your food. Don't eat the charred food. Look, ladies, they did not know the research. Now the research has panned out. And they're saying, yes, if you overchar your meat and you eat, there is now, Google it. There's research saying that if you microwave plastic, there's something in there with, they knew their bodies, that they could tell in their bodies that this was not good for them. So it's the same principle, right? We have a power structure that we're fighting against for work-life balance. And we have to listen to our bodies to inform us because, we're trained to kind of go. And anyway, so for me, I think about not microwaving as a metaphor. What am I microwaving my plastic in that's going to harm me over time? And how do I listen into that? Well, you've been listening to the L.A.B podcast, Latina, Asian, and Black women. Thank you for joining us.